Artists are often people with the most troubled minds. This inspires them to make the most creative art that makes us feel things we cannot explain. But even if the artist brings us much joy, it's often not a life of luxury and of happiness. Only a few lucky ones experience a life of luxury and happiness, but most of them die in poverty without any acknowledgement. They follow their passion in poverty. Vincent van Gogh thought his art wasn't appreciated, and that was partly true. But what he didn't know was that he would become one of the most beloved painters of all time. And what he also didn't know was that his cause of death would be questioned many years after his passing. Hi everyone and welcome back to a new video. I know it has been a while, but as I said before, I need to make time. I need to be in a good headspace that I really want to make a video. And this time I was, so here I am back again. But today it wasn't a problem to make a video because I'm gonna talk about somebody that I admire with all my heart. He is one of my favorite painters and he's also Dutch. And his name is Vincent van Gogh. I know most people from English countries say Van Gogh or Van Gogh, but his name is Vincent van Gogh. And I know it for certain because I have a family friend whose last name is Van Gogh, which I envy so much. He is mostly known for painting with striking colors, emphatic brushwork, contoured forms of his art, and also because of his troubled life. He is the stereotypical tortured artist. Vincent had a very difficult and hard life, but one thing that stood out for me was his relationship with his brother Theo. And I think that relationship is as beautiful as his paintings. It's because of the letters that Vincent wrote to his brother that we know so much about his life and thoughts. There are over 960 letters preserved, and most of them were written to his brother, but I will talk about that later in this video. Vincent tried to find peace and quiet for the entirety of his life, but unfortunately he would never find it and he would end his life feeling miserable and lonely. Or so the story goes. So since this is a mystery channel, we of course are gonna talk about all the theories surrounding his death, but not before we have talked about Vincent's life and legacy, because that is way more important. I want to give a warning before I begin. If you struggle with depression or with suicidal thoughts, maybe it's better to skip this video because it's very depressing to hear about Vincent's life story. So if you feel like you can't handle that, please leave this video and I see you another time. So let's pick up our paintbrushes and paint the first line in our artwork that is Vincent's life. Buckle up because it's a very big painting. It all started on March the 30th, 1853, when Vincent Willem van Gogh was born in the Dutch city Zundert. He was born in an upper middle class family. He was the oldest surviving child of Theodorus van Gogh and Anna Cornelia Carbentus. Vincent was named after his grandfather and also after his older brother who died when he was born, so he was stillborn, sadly. Vincent's brother Theo was born 4 years later, and after Theo his brother Cor was born and also his sisters Elisabeth, Anna and Wilhelmina. Vincent was known as a serious, quiet and thoughtful child, and he already showed signs of mental instability as a young child. He loved to spend his free time wandering around and observing the nature around him. Vincent's father was a Protestant pastor and Vincent tried to follow in his footsteps, reading about religion and preaching. Art might not have been a big part of his father's life, but many people in Vincent's family were art dealers. So when Vincent was 16 years old, he apprenticed to the The Hague branch of the art dealers Koepel & Co., of which his uncle and godfather Oom Sant was a partner. And his brother Theo also worked there. And this is also where his lifetime correspondence with Theo would begin. He stayed with the company for 7 years. First he worked in London from 1873 until May 1875, and after that in Paris until April 1876. Although he did not like working as an art dealer, he started to appreciate other Dutch painters like Rembrandt van Rijn and Frans Hals and other Dutch masters. But most of all, he liked the work of French painters Jean-François Millet and Camille Corot. Their influence would inspire his own work. Now we are going to a sad part of Vincent's life because his first heartbreak would come in London. He fell in love with the daughter of his hospita called Eugenie Lawyer, but she did not like him back, so it is said that this rejection made him neglect his work and fall into his first depression. This caused him to get fired and follow another path, becoming a language teacher and preacher in England. But this also failed and he tried many other things, but eventually he returned to the Netherlands when he was 24 years old. And his parents were very disappointed with him. Luckily, Uncle Sent made some arrangements and Vincent could work at a bookstore. He would become a servant in a bookstore in Dordrecht. And Vincent decided to study theology, but he wasn't really eager to study. He rather took long walks in the park. So his uncle advised Vincent to stop with his study because long studies were not Vincent's thing. And perhaps he was right. Vincent was eager to devote his life to serving God, so he moved to Belgium to the mine area of Borinage. He became a religious teacher and he visited the sick. And in one of the letters to Theo he wrote, "It is a dreary place. At first glance everything in the area has something sinister and deadly. Most of the workers are emaciated and pale by their fevers and they look exhausted and starved. They look old beyond their years and the women look pale and faded like all of them in general." And the life he described in his letter wasn't really that different from his own. He lived among these people, so he was also in a bad state. He was living in poverty. He gave away all his possessions and he slept on the floor. It did not take long before he was called the Christ of the coal mines. But his kindness and willingness to serve God did not pay off in the end. His contract ended and he was once again without work. But then his brother Theo suggested something to Vincent which unknowingly would make him famous. Vincent did not only write letters about his experiences, but he also drew them sometimes. Theo was impressed and said the magic words, "Vincent, I think you should become a painter." Vincent was in his late 20s, around 27, when he decided to become an artist. He was convinced that he could still serve God as a painter. In 1880, he decided to move to Brussels to devote his life to the arts. He met with many other artists and he worked on his technique. He wasn't earning any money, but occasionally he received some money from his brother Theo. This shows once again how close they were and what a big support Theo was for Vincent. Vincent was very grateful and he wrote that to Theo in his letters. After living in Belgium, he returned to the Netherlands. He lived in several places, including The Hague, where he fell in love with a prostitute. But more on that later. His parents were still displeased with him and thought it was a very stupid idea to become an artist. They were convinced that being an artist would never make you rich and that you would die of poverty. However, this did not stop Vincent and he moved back in with his parents. And you might think that his parents are harsh and horrible, but I have to say I always wanted to become a singer or an actress, and my parents also said you can pursue that, but also pursue a job which gives you money because security is very important. So I kinda get where his parents are coming from, and at least they allowed him to move back in because they could also have shown him the door. So he moved back in the spring of 1881. His parents lived in Etten, which was still in the same province in Brabant, where he was raised and born. And his brother Theo still worked at Gauguin & Co in Paris, and he still gave Vincent financial support so that he could pursue his dreams of becoming an artist. And it sounds like Vincent's life was going into the right direction, but unfortunately this was not the case. Vincent was seen as a failure. The eldest son of the family would become an artist. That's really the lowest thing you can reach in a family. Or maybe he could even get lower. In the summer of 1881, Vincent's cousin, Kee Vos, stayed at the rectory, and she was accompanied by her son. They recently lost their father and husband, and they tried to recover from their grief. She was 7 years older than Vincent. Vincent fell deeply in love with her, even though she was his cousin. This would become another heartbreak for Vincent because she did not feel the same way about him. He proposed to her, but she answered with no, nee, never, which is also known as nee, nimmer, nooit. And that's quite harsh. And if this embarrassment wasn't enough, his family was disgusted by all of this. He did not listen anyway because he still pursued her, and his family had enough. And after a heated argument, Vincent decided to move to The Hague. He also wrote his brother about this event. Dad has no sympathy for me, he can't feel for me, and I can't adjust myself to the system of mom and dad. It makes me terrified, it would choke me. Vincent would remain heartbroken over the Kee Vos situation, and years later he wrote this to his brother. It remains a wound that I need to live with, but it's deep and will never heal. Vincent was living in The Hague, and this is where he met Sien Hoornik in 1882. She was the prostitute that I mentioned before. At first she was a model for his paintings, but eventually he also fell in love with her. Vincent was a hopeless romantic. Could this be the woman he was waiting for? Well, it did not matter because Sien's reputation once again displeased his family. Even the artist Mauve, who thought Vincent was against this relationship. Not only was she a prostitute, she already had a 5-year-old daughter, and she was pregnant, and not with Vincent's child. Vincent felt sorry for her and he wanted to take care of her. So she was allowed to live in his atelier. I hope I say it right because I don't know how to say it in English. Even though Theo was also against this relationship, he still financially supported Vincent. And after 1.5 years, this relationship reached its end. Vincent was alone again, but he wasn't surprised. He wrote this to his brother. I knew she was wicked from the start, but I held hope that she would change. Now that I don't see her anymore and I think about what it was that I saw in her, I realized that she was already too far gone to change. Vincent was done with The Hague, so he decided to move to the province Drenthe. He wanted to draw the landscape because he thought they were pretty. But during the time that he was there, the weather was very cold and wet. He felt very lonely, and after 3 months he decided to move back in with his parents once again. While he lived with them in Newnan, he made one of his most famous paintings of all time called the Aardappeleters, also known as the Potato Eaters. Most of the paintings he made during that time were about the Dutch farmer life. He sent some of his work to his brother Theo so that he could sell them in Paris. But the French weren't impressed with his work. Vincent's work in the Netherlands was very dark and the French really liked more colors. Living with his parents was disastrous. They did not like his attitude and the way he dressed. Eventually, in the end of March 1885, Vincent's father died. He moved out of the house and applied to the art academy in Antwerp, Belgium. He would never return to the Netherlands. Vincent moved to Antwerp and learned to draw even better. However, he did not like the way he was taught to draw. He thought it was way too traditional. So it did not take long for him to discuss moving to Paris to live with Theo. He wanted to take lessons in the atelier of Fernand Corman. Theo wanted to find a bigger apartment before Vincent would arrive so that they could live together. But Vincent didn't really want to wait. He arrived in February of 1886 because he wanted to win some time. Vincent moved in with his brother in the famous area of Montmartre in Paris. I've been there and I've seen his house, which was really cool. Vincent became super inspired by all the modern art, and here is where his famous art style started to form. He started to use bright colors and started to develop his own way of painting by using short pencil strikes. He painted the environments, but also portraits because they would sell better. Most of the time he used himself as a model because he did not have enough money to hire a model. He lived in Paris for 2 years, but eventually Vincent longed for peace and quiet. His head was full of thoughts and the hectic life of Paris made him restless. He decided to move to the southern countryside of France in 1888 to the Provence. This is where his life would know highs, but also the lowest of lows. On the 21st of February, Vincent arrived in the Provence. He was going to stay in the town Arles, which was located next to the river Rhone. And for a time, Vincent was really happy there. He loved all the colors, the sunlight, and also the nature. It was really different from all the cities that he had lived in. He painted vineyards, boats, harvest, and used more color than he ever used before. He became so inspired that he wanted to start an atelier of the South, which would include a group of artists. He wrote to his brother about this idea because he thought that Theo could sell the paintings in Paris. Vincent wrote, "You know that I have always thought it would be foolish to live alone when you're an artist. You always lose when you are alone." And I agree with that, because if you look at artistic people, most of the time they are thinkers and they overthink and they get lost in their own thoughts if they are alone. Me as an artistic person, I have the same problem. So this idea doesn't sound like a fool's errand. But once again, Vincent could not know happiness or success. But I have to say, I do admire his strength because he never gave up. He always pursued his dreams. So he rented 4 rooms in the famous Yellow House, which was also located in Arles on the Place Lamartine. Eventually only one artist would come live with him, which was Paul Gauguin. But he did need some persuasion with money, but Theo gladly gave money for Vincent's well-being. He even wrote to Vincent that he hoped Gauguin would change his life and that Vincent could succeed by making his house a place where artists could feel at home. Seriously, if there is a Brother of the Century award, I think Theo would win it hands down. For 9 weeks, Van Gogh and Gauguin lived in the Yellow House, and this was a very productive time for the both of them. They would become close friends, but eventually things would sour. Van Gogh took advantage of Gauguin. He used his money and he did not take part in the household chores. They also quarreled a lot about artistic choices. Gauguin liked to paint from his imagination and Van Gogh liked to paint what he saw with his own eyes. A quarrel is nothing, but eventually things escalated quickly. I think you know where we are going. I will tell you more of the theories later, but this is what most sources claim happened. Vincent was known to have a weak mental state of mind. So when Gauguin threatened to leave, Vincent felt such an enormous pressure that he threatened Gauguin with a razor. Gauguin was of course shocked and he left the scene. Vincent was beyond himself, and in the evening he decided to cut off his own ear. He wrapped it up and delivered it to a prostitute who lived close by. The whole incident even reached the local newspaper. The following morning, Vincent was taken to the hospital of Arles. The news also reached Theo and he took the first train that he could find to Arles. Theo wrote a letter to his wife, Jo Bongers, when he visited Vincent. "I found Vincent in the hospital of Arles. In his excitement, he showed the whole area that he had symptoms of the most horrible disease. Madness, and in an act of complete insanity, he injured himself with a knife and therefore he was taken to the hospital. Had he succumbed to madness? The doctors fear it, but can't say it for certain." Theo traveled back to Paris and Gauguin as well, so another dream of Vincent was crushed. And this would be the beginning of the end. He would never be healthy again. His mental health was deteriorating. He was scared of himself and he was afraid that he would do something similar to the ear incident. He decided to stay in a psychiatric hospital in Saint-Paul-de-Mosol in Saint-Rémy. He stayed there for a year and produced over 150 paintings. Even though he was making amazing artwork, his mental state wasn't really changing. Sometimes he was so confused that he would eat oil paint. Yet he remained positive. He knew that his mind was troubled, but he believed that time and patience would change that. In January of 1890, Vincent received a birth announcement card from his brother Theo and his wife Jo. And he was shocked when he saw the name of his new nephew, because his name was Vincent Willem van Gogh. Yes, Theo, the brother of the century, decided to name his son after his beloved brother. And Vincent did not expect this at all. He felt sorry for his mother that the child was not named after his father. As an appreciation for this honor, Vincent painted a blossom tree so that he could give it to his new nephew. We always hear that Vincent never knew success, but this is not true. In 1890, 6 of Vincent's paintings were shown at an art exhibition in Brussels. And one of the artworks was sold and was called the Red Vineyard. People praised his work and even called it the height of the exhibition. Theo wrote this in a letter to Vincent. In May of the same year, Vincent would leave the mental institution and leave to Auvers-sur-Oise. This place was quiet but also close to Paris. This gave Vincent the opportunity to visit his brother more often. It seemed like Vincent was doing much better. His mental health was stable and he made almost a painting a day. Of course, whenever Vincent is happy, something bad needs to occur. On a visit to his brother Theo, he learned that Theo was thinking about quitting his job. Theo wanted to start his own company, but of course this would mean that he wouldn't be financially stable anymore, and this could also mean that he could not support Vincent. Of course, Vincent relied on Theo's financial support, so Vincent saw his dream crushed. Vincent could only see the worst case scenario. For him, it felt like his artistic life would end. He was very candid about this in his letters to Theo, and Theo and his wife tried to ease him, but Vincent felt fearful nonetheless and his panic attacks returned. He couldn't see a promising future anymore, only poverty and pain. For a time, Vincent could find comfort in the nature around him, but his illness and insecurities would take its toll eventually. A painting of Vincent would describe his end without him even knowing it. Or perhaps he did. The painting is called Cornfield Under a Thunderstorm Sky. It shows a beautiful happy field with a thunderstorm above it, which is quite like Vincent's mind. This would be the place where he would end his life on the 27th of July 1890. He could not live with himself any longer, so he took a pistol and shot himself in the chest. He did not die immediately. He returned to his room in Revel. Theo heard the news and rushed to Auvers. He was by Vincent's side when he died on the 29th of July. Vincent was 37 years old. Vincent thought he had never known true love, although he longed for it. But he did know true love because his brother was the greatest love of his life, and he was with him until his final breath. Theo was heartbroken by the death of his brother. Theo wanted to honor Vincent, so 1.5 months after his passing, he organized a memorial exhibition. Theo quit his job eventually, and after that he suffered a mental breakdown. He probably also suffered from syphilis, but this is not certain. Theo was sent to an asylum in Utrecht in the Netherlands, and he died in the end of January, not even half a year after the passing of his brother. His wife Jo would inherit the paintings of Vincent from now on. It could have ended here if Jo did not see the value of Vincent's paintings, but she did. She moved to Bussum with her son, who was also called Vincent, and took the whole collection with her. She brought attention to Vincent's paintings by lending them or showing them in museums all across the world. His work became more and more popular as time passed. People started to appreciate his specific style, and they would pay handsomely to own some of his work. He would become one of the most famous painters in the world, with the most expensive painting being Orchid with Cypresses, that sold for a record-breaking $117 million in 2022. And in 1888, Vincent wrote a letter to Theo, which would unknowingly predict his own future. I can't help it that my paintings don't sell, but there will be a day that they will see that they are worth more than the effort we put in it with paint and my all with all meager livelihood. Now you know about Vincent's life according to all the biographies that are written about him. Of course, when we look at his letters, we can know many things for sure. But the letters are mostly written from his perspective. So maybe it's not always the entire truth. Especially since his mindset wasn't always stable. And like with many other famous people, there are always other stories that explain things that happened in their life. And this is also the case for some events in Vincent's life. So let's dive into that. Theo, something has happened. Keep as silent as the grave about it. This is the start of a letter that Vincent wrote to his brother Theo. It was very uncommon to write about intimate or personal stuff to one another, but Vincent really needed to tell Theo about this horrible secret. One that might have gone to the grave if Vincent wouldn't have become a famous painter. In 1884, when Vincent was living with his parents in Nuenen, his mother broke her leg. She needed to recover, so she couldn't give her sewing lessons for a while. Therefore, Margot from the Bergman family decided to take the job over until she recovered. This is when Vincent met Margot, who was 12 years older than Vincent. Vincent fell head over heels in love with her, and this time it was reciprocated. They started an affair and they wanted to get married, but both of the families were against this. This made Margot so sad, angry and desperate that she decided to take some poison. Vincent found her unconscious on the floor and he was suspicious. He asked her if she had taken something and she replied by screaming yes. And then she asked him to never tell any other living soul about this incident. He had to tell her brother eventually because he wanted to save her life. They needed to take her to the doctor where she would get an antidote. After that, she had to go to an hospital in Utrecht to recover. Vincent was shocked by this incident, but he hoped that this failed suicide attempt would cure her from ever trying again. He became depressed by this event and he decided to write to his brother Theo about it to get it off his chest. Now we go back to the ear incident. I think we all know the painting where Vincent's head is covered with bandage. He made this painting after he cut off his own ear. Or did he? Some people claim that Vincent wasn't the one who cut off his own ear. But since it has a romantic touch to it, they don't want to change the narrative, so they leave it this way. And they also believe he couldn't have cut off his own ear because there are no other stories of people who cut off their own ears. So why was Vincent the only person that is known to have done it? Or didn't he do it? The suspect is the one who was in the room with him, Paul Gauguin. The story goes almost the same. Paul wants to leave. Vincent is very upset and they get into an argument. But in this story, they are outside of a brothel and they get physical. Gauguin was known as a skilled fencer, and he could wield a blade very easily. It is believed that he drew his weapon and served a piece of Vincent's left ear. It is not certain if he did it on purpose or if it was an accident, but both Van Gogh and Gauguin decided to keep it for themselves, and Vincent would say that he did it to himself. I find it very hard to believe, but there are people who believe this with all their heart. But since there is no real evidence, I don't think this theory is true. And at first it was believed that Van Gogh only took a part of his lobe because of a letter that Paul Signac, a French artist, wrote, and he had visited Vincent in the hospital. Eventually, the Van Gogh Museum found a diagram of Van Gogh's original wound, and that was drawn by the doctor who treated Vincent, called Felix Rey. The diagram showed the state of Vincent's ear, and as you can see, there was hardly anything left. So now we know for certain that he cut his own ear. Before I go into the theory that Vincent did not end his own life, I want to point out that the doctor, his friends, his family and the police all stated that he did commit suicide. And Vincent already tried to end his life earlier by eating toxic products. The theory about his murder became widely known in 2011, although it existed longer. Two American writers and art enthusiasts, Gregory White Smith and Stephen Nave, wrote about it in their biography about Vincent van Gogh, which came out in the same year. They did their research in collaboration with the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam. Smith and Nave won Pulitzer Prizes, so they are very serious writers. They claimed that Van Gogh did not commit suicide, but that he was murdered by his 16-year-old neighbor René Secretan and his brother. They visited Auvers-sur-Oise in the summer and they loved to taunt Vincent. René shot Vincent from a distance while he was enjoying the view of the cornfield. Since Vincent wanted to die anyway, he decided to welcome death and never mention this to anyone. He wanted to protect the young boy because he was only a child. This theory has even been used in the painted animation film Loving Vincent and in At Eternity's Gate. This sounds very random, but they added more details to the story. Smith and Nave mentioned that Vincent and the two brothers were all heavy drinkers. And since they already had a tense relationship with Vincent, this was toxic. The boys were also dressed as cowboys and they were playing with one working gun. So they could have shot Vincent accidentally, or it was a different outcome than they had planned. They also think that the way the bullet entered Vincent's body is very strange. Normally, if you want to commit suicide, the bullet would enter your body in a straight line. But this bullet took a strange turn. And this is only possible, according to them, if somebody else shoots you. The Van Gogh Museum doesn't want to change their opinion that Vincent has ended his own life. They think that the evidence is not strong enough because these stories were not told directly but rather indirectly. Rumors and hearsay hold this story together. But of course the two writers think otherwise. If you want to know my personal opinion, I think this theory is incorrect. Because if you read Vincent's letters, you can see he doesn't like injustice and he's very candid about everything in his life. So why would he protect them? I feel like he would feel that he was done wrong by them. And I wouldn't let them go away with it if I was in his shoes. So I think he would never protect other people. Maybe, yeah, I kind of understand why people would think that because he always wants to help other people, but this goes too far, I think. So in conclusion, I think that all the things we know about Vincent's life are the truth, or at least closest to the truth. He wrote so many letters that it's hard to debunk the stories we are told and taught at school. Of course, it's mostly from his point of view, but we also have other letters and we have other stories from his pen pals or people who lived or witnessed him in their life. I always feel very sorry for him because his life did not know a lot of happiness. I saw a video of Doctor Who. I did not watch the show, but I saw this video where they were taking Vincent to a museum and Doctor Who asked the professor who worked there what people would say about Vincent's work or what he would say about Vincent's work. And Vincent would hear how much people appreciated his work and what an amazing artist he was, and he was crying and it really touched me. And I wish he knew how much we all worship his work. And I think he's also a great example for people who struggle with mental illnesses. I think he gives us an insight into their thoughts. And I have struggled with mental illness as well. I was close to being depressed, but not really there yet. But I have had panic attacks, so I really know what he feels and how horrible it can be. And people can't understand what you're going through. So I think it's really good that we have an example of that. And him being a great artist and him being very candid about his feelings and thoughts is what makes him a great person, an inspirational person, and a very interesting person in history. And that is also why I love him so much. Now we understand what he tried to say to us, how he suffered for his sanity and how he tried to set them free. They could not listen because they didn't know how. But perhaps we can listen now. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. And if you like it even more, you can subscribe to my channel. You can also request other subjects underneath this video. And let me know what you think. Once again, thank you so much for watching and I see you the next time. Bye!
Toch zijn er meer nu dan je denkt, Vincent.